Sure, if you need it.
Hello, Mike. I've got several slight complications here. Firstly, I had some slides which I did a talk on this, and I can't find where I've put them. So I'm just going to have to free wing this by sharing my screen and showing you things from the website and from the videos and so on.
All right.
I'm sure it'll be interesting. The second complication is I have lost my voice. I lost my voice during a presentation to an amateur radio club in the US. It was an evening presentation, so in my time it was the middle of the night, and so somehow that 3 hours of talking in the middle of the night lost me my voice. And also I haven't got a camera or microphone on my PC, so is it okay if I've dialed in from my PC and if I share my screen from the PC, will that work? If I talk on one login and I share from another?
It should.
So I'm going to try that now. Okay, looks good.
Yep, we
okay,
hear you
it does work. All right, great. So I'll get started. This is a project which I started with Dave VE3 KCL in Toronto, Canada, way back in 2014, 2015. And back then, he was doing these experiments with the Ultimate 3S whisper transmitter kit that I'd built. And there's a guy also down in Australia, VK3YT, who had been flying pico balloons. Now, the difference between a pico balloon and the conventional high altitude balloons with the nice pictures from the edge of space is that the pico balloons have this mylar film balloon envelope. And so they ascend to an altitude of around 12,000 meters, 11,000 meters, whatever you can achieve that sort of altitude, which is above the weather. And then provided you've got everything correctly adjusted and balanced, the envelope of the balloon doesn't burst, doesn't keep expanding because it's not flexible envelope. It's a fixed envelope rather than a latex, which is flexible. And so it reaches an altitude and it floats there. And so the flights can go on for weeks or months, or in some cases over a year, and float around the Earth multiple times. And this brings its own particular set of challenges. Specifically, you are in trouble because of the very long distances you need to cover. You need, and secondly, you need a very, very light payload because you're flying small, cheap balloons. So it's a totally different thing to the high altitude balloons, which fly up to the edge of space, 35,000 meters, 40,000 meters, and then burst and come back down again and have a relatively short range. So for these applications, HF is a much better choice. And what VK3YT was doing back in 2014 timeframe was launching these balloons and using the JT9 protocol, which is a weak signal mode with a very narrow bandwidth. So it's very suitable for HF. And the narrow bandwidth of just a few hertz means that it has very, very long range and very high signal to noise ratio, even with very low powers. The difficulty he had was that he was using JT9 with a special version of WSJTX software to decode it, when that version had been modified to include, to upload the reports to his own server. And so he had to find people around the world who are willing to install this customized version of the software and install it to collect his spots. I realized that if we use Whisper for that purpose, we would automatically have a network of thousands of reporting stations, none of whom would have to be reported or even know that they were collecting data. And so that's how our project began, Dave and I, back in 2015. We went through multiple different iterations. To start with, he was just flying versions of my Ultimate 3S transmitter kit, which is this one I show here on the screen now. If I try and find some photographs, so it looks like that. And he was actually using a cut down version of this installed on an Arduino Nano, which had using a very low weight. And some of his earliest flights, so his earliest flights, it's all on the webpage qrplabs.com. His earliest flights used a payload, which I will show you. So this is his payload from his first flights, and you can see he's got a lithium polymer battery here with a voltage regulator circuit, U-Block's GPS board here. Here is an Arduino Nano, which has been hacked around and was installed the Ultimate 3S firmware on it. And here is a QRP Labs SI53518 synthesizer board as the RF generator. And that was his first flight. It ran at about 35 grams, and it flew for 2 hours, mostly because he was using some hydrogen from a tank which had been polluted with whatever gas was in there beforehand. So he didn't have the exact volume that he thought he was going to have, or the lift that he thought he was going to have. And his balloons burst halfway up, and so he got up to about 4,000 meters and burst and started coming down again. So that was his first flight over. But, you know, as many of the people who are watching this will know, ballooning is a very addictive activity, and once you've started one, you can't easily you can't escape after that. And so he ended up flying in total around 70 different test flights, and the whole sort of all the flights are listed here and photographs of each one. The first really successful one was the S4 flight, which made it across the Atlantic and flew for 5.5 days across the Atlantic. And so the whole idea of using Whisper to do the tracking involved designing a protocol that would send, so normally the Whisper packet sends just a call sign and a 4-character locator and a power level. But the 4-character locator is relatively inaccurate. You've got about 200 or 300 kilometers of resolution, and typically people want to know with more accuracy where their balloon is. And also you want to know things like the altitude of the balloon and the speed, things like battery voltage. So there's some telemetry that you want to return as well. And so the idea that I had was that we would use a second Whisper packet where the information was encoded into the call sign and the locator and the power level, but with 0 or Q for the first character of the call sign and 0 to 9 for the third character of the call sign. And so that would give us 20 different channels to operate balloons on without interfering with each other. And this page actually describes the whole telemetry protocol that I developed. From there, we went on to dedicated hardware, which also used the Atmega 328 processor. And eventually we ended up moving to an STM32 processor and this final production version of the board that you see here. This is actually a YouTube video on the topic, but you can see that the board is really, really small. It's 33 millimeters wide by 12.7 millimeters high, and it weighs 1.8 grams. So it's quite feasible to put together a payload with a tiny LiPo battery and a small solar panel and an antenna. The whole payload weighing less than 8 grams or so. And you can quite easily, with 2 very cheap Chinese balloons, so most of our test flights were run with these balloons where a 10-pack costs $15 US. And with 2 of those balloons, you can quite easily have a flight that lasts for weeks or months. So our record flight lasted 10.5 months and went almost 18 times around the world with tracking on almost every day. There's a few gaps we had when it was with bad propagation conditions over Mongolia or something like that. But generally, we had tracking almost every day. So this is what the board looks like, and it's designed so that section along the top there with the micro USB socket on it can be snapped off when you're ready for flight, leaving just this rectangular section, 12.7 millimeters by 33 millimeters, and weighing just 1.8 grams. If I can find a picture of the other side, and again, my apologies for losing my nice organized presentation on this topic, making things inconvenient here. So this is the top side view with the STM32 microcontroller. It has a 25 megahertz TCXO here, which is a 1/4 ppm TCXO. This is the SI53518 synthesizer, and this 8 megahertz crystal for the microcontroller. It has an EEPROM over here, which is organized as a disk drive, and I'll explain more about that in a moment because it's key to the features. Now, on the other side of the board, we have a SIM28M GPS module, which has been extensively tested and is not one of the GPS modules that fail over 10,000 meters. Voltage regulator here and LM75 temperature sensor. both the GPS and the transmitter are controlled by the microcontroller and P-channel MOSFETs. So you switch off the GPS when you want to use the transmitter, and you switch off the transmitter when you want to use the GPS. And this limits the maximum total current consumption of the device to around 35 milliamps. So it's a very low current device, a very low weight and low cost. The system also has these pads along the bottom here, which are GPIO pads, as well as on the other side of the board, you've got these pads as well. And between them, there are 19 different GPIO pads. Some of them happen to be very small pads near the pins, but some of them are exposed at the edge of the board and easy to connect to. And these 19 GPIO pads can be configured either as analog inputs, or at least 9 of them can be configured as analog inputs, or as digital inputs, digital outputs. You've got also an I2C bus exposed, and so it's quite easy to add any additional sensors that you want, such as a humidity sensor or a pressure sensor. So if I can go back here and just scroll through some of the interesting points on the video. I have this micro USB connector here, which implements a USB bootloader. So for updating firmware, you simply plug this into a USB port and it appears as a USB flash drive, and you just copy in the new firmware file. So it's very, very easy to upload firmware. There's also the really important aspect of this, and if I can scroll across the video, is it's got this built-in terminal. When you connect a terminal emulator to it, it's got this whole built-in operating system, which contains a basic programming language, a basic compiler, a full-screen text editor with a debugger. It contains a file manager. So it's got a very simple configuration screen here. And in the configuration screen, you can get by with just entering your simple call sign. And that's pretty much all you need to do to configure a flight for being launched. It comes with a built-in program that's called Tracker. That is all you need to do to transmit a Whisper packet followed by a telemetry packet with the 5th and 6th characters of your Maidenhead locator, your altitude, ground speed, battery voltage, and temperature. So all of those are collected by the website, which I'll show you in a moment. It also shows you what format your telemetry will look like on Whisper. So in this case, in this particular example, it has a Q as the first character and 0 to 0 as the third character. And it starts on the 4th minute and it's transmitting on 20 meters with this particular frequency. One of the features I added to this was that we have now 600 telemetry channels. And the way that works is we use a 0, 1, or a Q as the first character of the call sign. 0, 1, and Q call signs are never allocated by ITU, and therefore they're invalid call signs and they cannot interfere with any other Whisper users. So the first character can be one of 3 different things, 0, 1, or Q. The third character is one of the numbers 0 to 9. So that would give 30 channels. Then we operate with a 10-minute transmission period, repeating every 10 minutes, and with 5 different time slots. So this is starting on minute 4. Another channel might start on minute 8, for example. And so that multiplies the number of channels by 5. And then we additionally split that 200 hertz of Whisper subband up into 5 different segments. We ignore the middle segment because the middle segment often tends to be busier because of the people who read the WhisperNet homepage, and when they said USB dial frequency, they didn't understand that that's a center frequency of a 200 hertz band rather than the actual frequency you must use. And so the middle of the Whisper band tends to be more busier than the edges. And so we split it up into 5 segments and ignored the center segment. And so we just have these 4 40 hertz wide segments on the sides. So that multiplies the number of channels again by 4. So you have the 4 frequency segments, 5 time slots, 10 third character of the call sign, and 3 for the first character of the call sign. And if you multiply that all together, it gives you 600 different channels. In this particular example, the balloon is configured for channel 403. So you could launch 600 balloons and they would not interfere with each other. So it's quite a powerful system for being able to handle volume scalably. Now, you might wonder how it works when WSPR receivers are so badly calibrated that there's an error on the WSPR report, which is entered into WSPRnet by the monitoring stations. And I got around that by writing a software program that runs on my web server every 2 minutes. It loads all of the WSPR spots for 20 meters, and it starts averaging across a matrix and cross-referencing between a matrix of all these spots and works out what the error of each receiving station is. So if you're a receiving station and you've received my balloon and my balloon has been received by 10 other stations, I can start averaging to find out what the true frequency is and to work out the error of every receiving station's measurement. And so when we do this, we actually find out it corrects for all the errors in calibration of all the WSPR monitoring stations across the entire WSPR network. And it does all of that automatically. And we end up with the actual corrected frequency of each WSPR report being about plus or minus 1 hertz. So it's astonishingly accurate, and it very easily allows us to get in the middle of that 40 hertz band, a part of the subband, the WSPR subband. The TCXO keeps the transmitter very honestly in the middle of that as well. So if we needed more channels, we could go for even narrower segments. Rather than 40 hertz, we could use 10 hertz, for example, and then we'd have 2,400 channels. And so there's a huge flexibility of what we can do. So now if I scroll along, the original intention here is that the QRP Labs U4B balloon tracker actually provides a complete end-to-end tracking solution. So if you log into the QRP Labs shop with your account on the QRP Labs shop, and you would not have to have bought anything for the QRP Labs shop particularly, you could have just created an account anyway. And you can enter on the QRP Labs shop your call sign, the flight name, and the channel number. And as soon as you've done that, perhaps it's better if I actually log into the QRP Labs shop myself and my account, log in. It'll be clearer if I have it on my screen myself. So here are my balloon flights. I can scroll in to make that larger. And you can see you've got the possibility to add a flight, edit a flight, delete a flight. And as soon as I click new flight, for example, here I put in the flight name, call sign, the channel number, and any description which I want to add about that flight. As soon as I've done that, the flight will show up on the tracking page on the main QRP Labs website. It will show up here in a list of flights of all the people who have registered, and I can then click on my particular flight and I will see a map showing the path of my balloon. Now this is one which is launched by SA6BSS. It's not actually a QRP Labs U4B as far as I know, but he's just set up the tracking page to use that. And so this is a live updated map using the reports which are coming in every 10 minutes. The color coding that is being used is the resistor color code. So the first lap is colored brown, the second lap is colored red, third lap is orange, fourth lap is yellow, etc. And so we decided to use the resistor color code for that. And you can see the current position here that he has on the purple. Oh, why did that freeze? No idea why my computer is hung up here. It's kind of worrying. So anybody who says that Linux never crashes,
Only
it does. Mine does anyway. It's just become completely unresponsive. Anyway, I will reboot my computer, and meanwhile I can continue talking on my, it's responding to that. No, it's not responding. Okay, sorry about this. So I will just reboot the computer, and while we're doing that, I will continue talking. Presumably you can all still hear me, because I'm dialed in on my phone now. So at least that was one
audio
good...
and video, just your screen is frozen.
Yeah, so that at least one good thing about Linux is it boots in very quickly. So anyway, my whole goal with this project was to develop a very, very low cost solution for whisper tracking that would be very easy to implement at a very basic level. It can be implemented just by typing your call sign in on that terminal emulator, and you've got a complete tracking solution already made that will also collect your telemetry and into a database and have it all available for being downloaded. So now I'm logged back in, and I should be able to find the Zoom link and rejoin it. Superlaunch.org. Okay, so I managed to get back in. So yeah, I was just showing you then the demonstration of how the mapping works. And so there will be very shortly further down on the page a download link where you can download the entire telemetry for the flight. There's also, I should add, a third and fourth telemetry packet which can be used to transmit any of your own data. You have only about 39 bits of data per packet that you transmit. So it's not a huge amount of information that you can send back, but you could easily use it for sending back enough information such as pressure, humidity, and anything else like that. So this is a screenshot of the basic program. This is a very simple example of a basic program that just loops from 1 to 10 and prints the result. But you can do almost everything in this basic program. There's a file manager where you store the programs. You can also, there's an integrated debugger, so you can step through one line at a time and look at the variables and any output printed from the program. You can read and write to files, and you can transmit not just Whisper, but you can actually transmit CW, Hellschreiber, JT9, JT65, FSK CW. You can transmit a large number of digital weak signal modes, basically everything that the Ultimate 3S can manage. So here's a screenshot of the file manager, how that looks. And so the idea really of the whole thing was to be able to create a Whisper tracker that made everything easy. And going back to 2015, when we started the project, there were no other pico balloon trackers commercially available. That's not the case anymore. At least I think there were some commercially available, but they were not sort of mass available. They were kind of small quantity. And so the idea that we had here was to make this something that was easily available and would make things easy. So you wouldn't have to spend time worrying about soldering miniature parts onto tiny circuit boards. And so it would open up the hobby to a much larger number of people. So just going through, there's a command line here that you can run. So it's like a complete sort of miniature operating system. Here I talked about the contents of the board again and GPIO pins. And you can really start to imagine, even if you were not a computer programmer, how useful this would be to be able to run a simple flight. It would be good for universities, perhaps university projects, even school projects. So whereas a high altitude balloon flight with a weather balloon and quite a lot of payload might cost several $100s, this potentially provides a much cheaper solution. So there were 250 of these, which I produced in the first batch, and they went on sale a couple of months ago. They were all ordered within 1 week. And so I'm now trying to produce a second batch of 500 of these. The second batch, I've managed to get hold of the microcontrollers that are needed, and I've managed to order the GPS that are needed as well. And so gradually things are coming together, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, I should have 500 more of these to sell. And so that's the U4B balloon tracker, new product from QRP Labs just a couple of months ago, and hopefully something that will make pico ballooning affordable or much cheaper to do. I should talk about the ordering page on the QRP Labs shop. So the price of that was $59 in the first batch. My original intention was to make it sub $50, but the chip crisis has intervened with that, and things like the microcontroller chip were 10 times the pre-pandemic price, and so it became necessary to increase the price. So that's the page on the QRP Labs shop, and hopefully very soon I'll have another 500 there available for purchase. So I think that's a brief summary of the capabilities. The main QRP Labs webpage has a lot of details of the various test flights that we ran here on the left-hand